Hello, everybody. We are going to get started in just a couple of minutes. While we are waiting, feel free to introduce yourself and where you're dialing in from in the chat. And I'm going to hop into the chat as well, just to say hi to everybody. Make sure that you are set to all panelists and attendees when you introduce yourself. Like I said, we'll get started in a few minutes. Or not even a few minutes, a minute. There we go. There we go. Hello, Debbie from Columbus, Ohio. This is exciting to have you here. St. Louis, Missouri, hello. Wow, St. Louis, hello, everybody. Orlando. Wow, that's exciting. And we're just gonna give you all a couple more seconds here to pop in, and then we're gonna go ahead and get started. Oh, hi, John. I'm glad that you could be here. All right, well, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started so we can get me off the screen and me not talking anymore and let the panel get started. So without further ado, here we go. This is being recorded. So if anybody hops on in the middle, they won't have heard me say that, but it is going to be recorded and sent out at the end. So welcome to General Assemblies Made in the Midwest Week. This is our Thursday event, and we are coming at you from all over in the Midwest. We've been doing programming all week, and tomorrow we have one more event that I will send follow-up about, but it's an event for job seekers with employers who are currently hiring in the Midwest and hoping for job seekers to come. So I will send out information about that. But to first introduce you with the General Assembly team that put all of this together, myself, I am Megan, I use she, her pronouns, and I am based in Minneapolis. Then we have Ben from Detroit, Caroline from Chicago, and Carrie, who I believe is in the chat, in St. Louis, wrapping it all together. And like I said, tomorrow we have the behind the job description event that you can come into. We also have a discount code for classes and workshops that are short form for 50% off any of those that you can redeem. And the workshop doesn't have to be happening this week, so you could still hop online and redeem it for something that's happening a little later. So be sure to check that out, and that will be included in the follow-up email. And then a quick thank you to all of our partners. And we'll be saying a little bit more about one of those partners in just a bit. But before all of that, I want to introduce you to General Assembly ever so briefly, because I know you're here for a panel conversation. But what is General Assembly and who are we? So we started in 2011 as a co-working space in New York City. And since then, we have grown immensely to having over 30 campuses globally. You can see them here on the map. And we work to inspire people to find work that they love. And we do that through free events like this that bring people together. And we also do short form classes and workshops, like I mentioned. And I see a question in the Q&A. I will put the code in the chat, and it will go out in the follow-up email. So don't stress about that. But we do short form classes and workshops on topics like the ones listed here: coding, UX design, data, etc. And then we have part-time and full-time courses in all of those as well that are taught live, currently taught remotely. And so I would encourage you to check all of that out in the follow-up email that I'm going to send. So some meeting norms in case this is your first Zoom webinar. I don't know how that's possible, but welcome. We are using Zoom for the duration of the event. You can use the chat or the Q&A for questions. We are recording the event, and it will be sent out afterwards in the follow-up email. If you go to ga.co/events, if that's not how you access this one, that's how you can see our other events. And you can follow us on social media, and I will be sharing some LinkedIns after this as well. So we did it. We made it. And now if you fine panelists would like to come off video and our wonderful moderator, we will get into it. And then I will stop sharing my screen and we'll actually get into the meat of it. So a 3-minute introduction as promised. So I think that's it. Thank you. I think that's it for me. Kim Cordova is my wonderful colleague in Wisconsin and was so excited about Made in the Midwest happening that we decided to invite her to moderate this panel. And so I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to let Kim introduce herself and then we're going to rock and roll. So thank you all for being here. And like I said, put questions in the chat and in the Q&A and here we go.
Well, hey everybody, I'm Kim. I use she, her pronouns. Like Megan said, I am based out of Madison, Wisconsin, and I've been with General Assembly for about 5 years. I manage our student financing here. So for all of the part-time courses and immersive courses, if students are not paying for those out of pocket, we have a bunch of different financing options for those, and I manage that part. So I am not in healthcare and I'm not in AI, but I am in the Midwest, and I'm really excited to moderate this panel. And I did want to mention, Megan brought it up earlier, but this bouquet behind me was sent to us, to me by one of our partners called Flowers for Dreams. They are based in the Midwest. They have hand delivery of these bouquets in Chicago and Milwaukee and Detroit, and they have overnight shipping. So the one I got from Milwaukee came to me like overnight. It was awesome. And with these bouquets, they donate to a local charity every time you purchase a bouquet. So check them out. It's flowersfordreams.com is their website. I feel like a total influencer being like, check out this beautiful flower brand, but they're really exceptional company. So that's me. And I'd love the panelists to introduce themselves, where you're from, what you do, and what brought you here to GA today. So why don't we start with Yiding?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yiding Yu, and I am Chief Medical Officer at Virata Health, which is a Minneapolis headquartered company focused on leveraging AI to solve prior authorizations in healthcare. And prior auths are basically any time you go to the doctor and you need a prescription or an MRI or a surgery and your insurance needs to approve it before you can get it. So it's a huge problem and we're really excited to be solving it for them.
It's great to meet you. Kiyoko, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hello, everybody. My name is Kyoko Crawford. I am the CEO and co-founder of Skin.io. We are a Chicago-based health tech company here. We do AI-based full-body skin cancer screening on mobile devices, so smartphones and tablets. And really excited to be on this panel today.
Thanks. I'm really excited to hear more about that. It sounds like a very needed tool for today. And Jacob, last but not least.
Hey guys, I'm a machine learning engineer here at Roboflow. Roboflow is a early stage computer vision startup that makes it easy for developers to deploy computer vision into their own application via kind of like web application interface. It's been an exciting time working at Roboflow. We've been growing quickly and just finished the YC summer batch this summer and starting to gain some traction in terms of users and getting a feel for the space. So I'm excited to be here and looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, that's such an exciting time for your company to be able to like turn that corner. It's very cool. So first question, a little bit of a softball, but as we get started, if you could just each tell us about your career, how did you get to where you are now, and a bit about your background. So let's do same order, starting with Yiding.
All right. Well, my background's fairly probably unconventional. I'm a physician, so I went to med school, did all of that, did residency. I'm actually a practicing physician, so I still see patients ever so often. But while I was in residency, I started my first company in healthcare. Realized that I love the thrill of building something from scratch. Had no idea how to raise capital or anything like that. Just basically winged it and made tons of mistakes along the way. But I scaled my first company to be the market leader in the Northeast. It was focused on first responders. And then wanted to figure out what I wanted to help solve next, and met the co-founders of Virata Health. And we've just been kind of killing it since. And my role, Chief Medical Officers have kind of very diverse roles depending on what they do. I lead both our marketing arm as well as our customer success arm, which handles all of our client relationships, our go lives, technical implementations, ongoing client relationships. So it's kind of a wide breadth, but it's super fun because I get to work with health systems and end users every day. And we've been, as a company, have been out in the market for now, I would say 2 years. Initially started with just kind of some pilots, but now, support thousands of physicians and really now working with larger systems. So it's been a really wonderful journey to see the company grow from like a 10-person company to now, over 70 people in the company. And we're actively growing and actively hiring across all positions. So I'm super excited to kind of continue on the journey.
You said from 10 to 70 in 2 years?
Yes.
Wow. Congrats. Kyoko, same question. Tell us a bit about your background, how you got to where you are now.
Very cool. Yes. So by background, I was a biomedical engineering major in college and was entrepreneurial ever since. So prior to co-founding Skin.io, I actually co-founded and ran a technology development consultancy. So a tech dev shop in New York for about 9-10 years, around the time when I was familiar with General Assembly around that time as well. And I then about 5 years ago started Skin.io. My partner in this, so I am not a dermatologist. I am not an MD. I'm also not a machine learning or AI specialist at all. So I'm grossly unqualified for this panel. And I'm just going to be straightforward about that right now. But my co-founder is a dermatologist and skin cancer surgeon who has had the singular honor of having saved my father-in-law's life from melanoma twice. And so his clinical expertise, the story behind how he discovered my father-in-law's melanoma, and the importance of being able to track your skin for changes is how we founded Skin.io and turned it into what it is today. And so really going after the access to dermatological care, which is a very pronounced problem, and leveraging kind of the value and just capabilities of our commodity platforms and devices out there today with the cameras they all have as a way to bridge that gap.
What an incredible why behind where you got to where you are now. And again, like what a great tool to exist and to be spearheading it. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
Jacob, same question. How did you get to where you are today? What brought you to this part of your career?
Yeah, that's awesome. And just super excited to be here to talk with you guys. So my background is I kind of started getting into programming and AI related stuff in college, and I was like working on making like trading algorithms and started my career off as a quant. So I was kind of like just processing market data and writing scripts to try to predict where prices might be moving and stuff. And then kind of ultimately found that my interests there were more directly correlated to just kind of the math and the machine learning behind things. So I got interested in AI and started doing some research and got into a NLP company where we're making like virtual assistants and chatbots. And then recently jumped ship from there over to Roboflow to work with some old time friends and kind of moved back to the Midwest, and we're kind of new project, a little earlier stage project here.
So how long have you been back in the Midwest?
So I've been back for about 6 months now. So I was out in Michigan before that. So
right. We get summer. Now we get the nice fun winter. I'm going to keep the mic on you. Like we don't really have physical mics, but as the machine learning specialist here in the panel, tell us in your own words, how would you define machine learning and AI to somebody like me who really doesn't have a clear understanding of what that is?
Sure. So I'll give it a stab, but I'm learning more every day about what exactly it can mean. I'd say it's anything where you're taking in data and then making a prediction based on that, just by leveraging the insights that the computer is able to derive from that data. So could be kind of any source, but the common ones are to be processing image data, video data, or text data. Yeah, I know there's something to it.
That's a good explain like I'm 5 moment. Next question. I'm gonna well, let's pause. Do Kyoko or Yiding have any additional context for how they like to explain machine learning?
I think Jacob's like explanation is really great. It's like we all know that AI and ML are really diverse fields, and the way I think about it, especially in our field of healthcare, healthcare has done a lot of things that are formulaic. We've pre-programmed things where we say, well, if you add A plus B times 5x C, that's how we do it. Clinical decision support algorithms have been all hard-coded. So we are really used to hard-coded stuff that are using human intelligence to like pre-program, and half of what we do as doctors are done like that, right? We know exactly the dose of the drug and this by weight, but that's not, none of that would be kind of AI or ML, right? That's all human driven. And so I think its ability to say, what can a computer analyzing a ton of data be able to see trends that humans are incapable of drawing out or mapping themselves. I get to work with our chief product officer at Verada, who is his name is Rob Laumeyer, and he is the original inventor of what all of us know as Google Maps. So he has the original patents to that. He sold it to Google and has been building AI for a really, really long time. So when he helped found Verada, he was actually working for Elon Musk at SpaceX, programming the rocket landing code. So he's done like just amazing stuff. And I love how he talks about AI because it's all about modeling and the math behind it. And it's all about, being able to have kind of repeatable models that help kind of predict new things. And so in healthcare, that means ingesting a ton of data. There's actually less data in healthcare sometimes than you can imagine because there's just so much human variation, right? So it's like, okay, there's a variation in skin color or a variation in age or gender and slight variation in the diagnosis. So when you actually get into how many people with this exact diagnosis, with these exact characteristics had the exact same thing happen, instead of actually having 20,000 records, at Verada, we're like, oh, we're down to 100 records, and 100 records is much harder to build AI on. And so we spent a lot of effort trying to figure out and pool data across a lot of different systems to be able to really train our AI algorithms so that we can predict and actually read the medical literature and read the medical chart and basically replicate what a human does today when they do a prior auth.
And Kyoko, I saw you nodding a lot when Yiding was mentioning how there's not as much data as one would expect. Would you like to kind of expand on that and talk through your experiences with the data available and for diagnosis?
Yeah, no, so yes, I think one of the biggest challenges with AI in healthcare is the data, right? And, data is a critical core component to any AI discipline and infrastructure. And in healthcare, it's especially difficult, right? Because you have something like ImageNet, which I shouldn't be talking about because Jacob can explain this better, but you can have millions of photos of cats and dogs and things that are pretty obvious for a layperson, right? Or even a toddler. But when you're looking at things like healthcare, and healthcare itself is a broad universe, right? Yiding is talking about prior authorizations and all of that side of the administrative side of healthcare. There's also the clinical side and diagnostic versus visual aid, all of that. And it is specialized enough where there's a reason Yiding's an MD and I'm not, right? She has a specialized expertise that is required to be able to annotate and label and classify the data that's relevant to each of these cases in healthcare. That's not as easy to crowdsource as labeling cats and dogs. And so, so there's that aspect, right? You have a very specialized data set that is realistically really expensive to label and annotate because the resources who can do that are limited and they're expensive resources. Then, beyond that, I think with healthcare too, it overall, as Udane was talking about, the data sources historically have been human driven. There aren't very many clean data sets at scale in healthcare. And so you're working with, on both sides, huge challenges in compiling a quality, clean data set on which you can train these models. Because the math and the science is there, the model infrastructures are there as well, but the data is actually really, really hard. And for us, I mean, dermatology is a super niche specialty among healthcare as well. This blows my mind every time, but there are 9,600 dermatologists in this entire country of 330 million people, right? And so, you're talking about a subspecialist among subspecialists. And so there aren't enough dermatologists. There also isn't a whole lot of dermatology data out there as well, where as a specialty, dermatology typically has not, or historically has not done as much imaging. And so, that's one of the big challenges here, where how do you find the quality data? How do you curate it? How do you annotate it? Also, as an early stage startup that doesn't have, a huge war chest of funds. So I totally resonates with me.
Well, it sounds like there are, a lot of commonalities of the uses of machine learning, regardless of what you're using it for. But it also sounds like the healthcare has its own unique examples and implications. Jacob, I'd love to hear from your perspective. You probably have inside of healthcare and outside of healthcare. I'd love to hear a little bit about the differences and nuances of AI through the scope and lens of healthcare.
Yeah, sure. This whole conversation is definitely resonating with us, the mission of Roboflow, quite a bit. In that, kind of one of the big things we're working on is being able to generate artificial training data from the base training data that's uploaded into the platform. So there's a lot of image augmentation techniques and stuff that we're doing to try to kind of bootstrap from just a very basic data set up to a larger data set that can generalize a little bit better, and trying to kind of make those augmentation techniques more accessible to just kind of anyone who wants to use them. But I can imagine that's probably pretty important in for Kyoko's use case of trying to get as much out of the data set that you can. But of course, at the end of the day, there's nothing that can trade off for just a large data set of ground truth. So I definitely could see how that can be the thing that holds the models back from getting to performance state.
Thank you. Anybody want to add anything else on that?
No, to your point, Jacob, because we are trying to augment our data sets, that is one of the things that our data science team works on, because the data is so precious and not as plentiful as any of us would like. The augmentation techniques have been a huge boon for us in terms of, building up that data set from kind of the quality ground truth ones that we have. So definitely that is something that we certainly work on.
So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about really the business choices and strategy and operations behind healthcare using AI. And this could go to anybody, so if it feels like it resonates with being the decision maker on this, but adopting AI for automation requires a unique skill set and organizational structure. So where in your business does automation sit today? This is interesting because this is a variety of different size companies and stage companies here. And where do you think it'll sit in 10 years?
I think it kind of depends on whether you kind of think about when I think about my customers who are health systems versus us at Verada, we're an AI company. And so, AI is just part of our technology team. It's part of our, it's part of our whole infrastructure. It feels like core to what we do. And even within our AI teams, it's broken up because we have to do natural language processing. So we've built our own natural language processing. Plus, then there's AI modeling that uses that. And there's a bunch of other things that kind of go into the mix, but it's all part of our product team. And probably will continue growing in there. But I think if I were to talk about the healthcare system, so before starting my own companies, I used to serve as chief innovation engineer for a $2 billion health system based in Boston. And for a long time, healthcare companies tend to be health systems tend to be very conservative. And certainly they didn't do any like AI on their own, right? They bought stuff from Oracle and McKesson, reporting sets. But I think there's more and more adoption of AI in healthcare today. So if you are a startup or a company that's looking to sell into healthcare, there's a lot of more education and a lot more appetite. And where I see this, some is in the clinical space, but the clinical space can be pretty tricky, especially if you're doing diagnostics or therapeutics, because there's FDA issues, right? And so I as a doctor can't just pull something off the shelf and be like, I'm going to diagnose a patient with this. So that goes through a little longer process. Where there's been incredible movement recently has been on the administrative, so the financial side, because I'm not trying to diagnose a patient, I'm trying to reduce administrative overhead. And so then I don't have to have the FDA to clear me. And so that's where we've seen different technologies. There's been more computer vision. These have been used by like traditionally they're like bots, like robotic process automation bots, which bots themselves are kind of dumb. They basically do one thing. They're programmed to do one thing. It's like copy and paste. There's more companies now that are throwing AI on top of bots. They're saying we're learning from all of this, or they're using computer vision to help build some of that stuff. So you're seeing a lot of adoption of that. You'll actually, Partners Healthcare, now called Brigham Mass General Health, actually hired like 30 engineers in-house to be able to build this themselves. So they said, I didn't want to outsource it. I'm going to actually build this. So that was pretty new, but we're seeing some healthcare systems start trying to bring in engineers who are able to do that. But really what I think a lot of health systems are admitting that they probably aren't the best place to hire engineers, like they don't have the right training or the right infrastructure. And so they're hiring companies who have SaaS models, like software as a service models. So say, use my AI suite that will help you with billing capture, will help you with claims denials, will help you with prior authorizations, like what Verada does. And so if you are able to sell a product that kind of wraps AI into like a software as a service and kind of plugs into their system, there's been a lot of adoption of that across a lot of health systems where they're finally seeing the benefits of AI that many industries already, you look at healthcare, AI is used everywhere across most industries. And I think healthcare is finally getting on that track and adopting it more broadly.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think there's a misconception or a temptation, I think more broadly from the general public, that AI in healthcare necessarily means that the algorithm will see you now and that there will no longer be any doctors, which is, I think, very far from the truth. And it's not reality, and nor should it be, right? I mean, in a somewhat extreme but relevant example, I mean, Boeing airplanes, with the exception of the latest, they fly themselves, right? But we still have pilots. In a way, I think healthcare will go more towards that model, but where AI ultimately, I think, makes a lot of sense is in the automation administrative side of healthcare, where there are a lot of inefficiencies and better triage to care. Because I think, look, doctors are really expensive for us to create in society. They are a highly specialized resource that has a very specialized set of skills that is needed. They ultimately treat patients who need that care, but there is a huge, spectrum between a patient at home wondering if they're sick, and actually getting, in our case, it's a rare case, but it's skin cancer that's pretty prevalent, that can be fatal, and getting to a dermatologist, one of the 9,600, there's a huge amount of space there, and there are a lot of inefficiencies built in along the way. And so, you know, the role of AI in healthcare from our perspective is not to diagnose skin cancer at home. It is to better shorten that pathway for you to get the right type of care to deal with that and potentially save your life. So, you know, I think there is a lot of room in healthcare for AI, but it needs to be deployed and applied intelligently and responsibly, because, you know, it's a high stakes industry too. That's why you have to go through FDA. That's why you have to do all these things diagnostically that you wouldn't have if you're standing up a consumer product. And I think that's one of the challenges when, you know, popularly people think that AI can solve everything because it can learn it's as smart as us. That's not necessarily true, right? And you know, the mechanics of healthcare is probably a fraction of what a doctor actually does and what their empathy and their knowledge actually contributes to. And I think it's really important, especially now when there is so much interest in AI and its applications across industries, to recognize that's why it's difficult in healthcare, but there are really targeted ways to make healthcare better through the use of AI.
I mean, it sounds like it just opens up resources that are being used to like figure out that stuff, and opens up those resources to do more compelling sort of things. And I think both of you brought up the sort of like notion of healthcare is, you know, adapting AI at a fast pace, and that some people are anxious and nervous about robots kind of taking over. And Jacob, so we haven't heard from you in just a moment. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that sort of like misconceptions around machine learning, AI, and you know, your thoughts around that.
Yeah, so that's kind of right in line with what I was sort of thinking about with what Kyoko was saying. Is like, I definitely see like the reality of AI and the way it should be used as kind of like an extension of human intent, and like just sort of like a way to like technologically expand our capabilities, and less so of this kind of like replacement mindset, which is what a lot of people have, where they kind of see it as or they kind of like envision this like Terminator type concept, you know, where there's like the AI is kind of fully replacing the human doing things, and then there's going to be some sort of massive incoming unemployment that's going to come. And I guess before the coronavirus, you know, like there's been machine learning technology coming into the scene for like a long time, and we just haven't seen that yet. So I think some of those thoughts are maybe off base, but I mean, obviously, you know, there could be there's always these like moments where things move really fast and the technology advances. You don't know exactly how it's going to happen, but certainly at this point in time, it's pretty like narrow custom models that can kind of extend our use cases, and the human is always still in the driver's seat. So, and then I also kind of had one other separate thought going off when Yiding, you were mentioning that AI hasn't progressed as fast in healthcare as it has in other industries. And I was kind of wondering why you might think that is. And I'll just posit one theory that maybe like in healthcare, the data security kind of holds things back. Like for example, I was just trying to switch providers for like go see another medical provider, actually just like 30 minutes ago. And I downloaded my medical records, and it came down onto my computer like in a zip file. And they're like, oh yeah, you need to fax that to us. And I obviously have no ability to like fax the data over it. It's like a super like, can I just like drag and drop my data into your web app, or like how can I get this to you? But I was wondering if you think that that's part of the reason, and if you face any of that at Verada, where you're like you have the AI ready to work, but just getting data through the systems is the thing that's holding it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. People are always like, why are, doctors still using pagers? I mean, like, people used to say like only drug dealers and doctors use pagers, and now only doctors use pagers. Like drug dealers are like so not on pagers anymore. So like we're still holding pagers. I think, kind of a real fear of like data security and just kind of I'll say HIPAA penalties. So HIPAA is like kind of the patient privacy rules. Those penalties are in the millions of dollars. So every time there's like a incident, it's very, very expensive, and it's like, oh, so bad. The federal government has come down and fined you millions of dollars. So it's created a very conservative interpretation. And while we all know, right, like somehow I have software that connects to all my credit card companies and monitors all my credit scores, and I can get into my banking, and between 2FA and all this stuff, like everything is fine. In healthcare, they're like, please fax me your records. And so I do think there's been that. I give fax a hard time because faxes were grandfathered in to be exempted from HIPAA requirements. And so there is HIPAA compliant fax, which is just a slightly more secure fax line than normal fax. However, the requirements for every other piece of software is like, it has to be like a person has to log in to be able to get it. You can't just like randomly sift through. And we all know that when something hits a fax scanner, it just prints out and anybody can pick up that stack of papers and walk away with it, and nobody does anything about it. So I think one of the reasons why we've relied on archaic things like faxes or pagers is because they've been exempted, we've started now using them as a crutch, and we don't have to. Literally, they're like, well, you could build this ultra secure digital system, or you can fax it. And they're like, well, we'll just go with fax. So I find that challenging. I do think that the industry is trying to work towards better standards of data interoperability. And I'm really motivated by just consumerism in healthcare. What you just said, you moved between doctors and you felt empowered to download your medical records and send it. Before, that used to be like, oh, just call my doctor will do that. Like the fact that you feel like you should own your documents, that you should be able to see all that, that's been a seismic shift in healthcare. Like for a long time, doctors were even like, I don't know if I want my patients to see the records. And it took some time to just be like, they're about their patients, like they own it, it's their data, like, I think the more transparent we become and more we're open to that, and the more demands from patients to say like, yes, I want it, that's gonna, really, really make inroads and help us out. But absolutely, I mean, half our challenge when we're sifting through clinical data is that a good 40% of a medical record is scanned records. And so when we try to NLP that, we have to OCR it first. Then we have to try to NLP on like poorly scanned faxes that we've OCR'd and the lines don't, align up. It's hellish to try to do all of that. But that's what you had to do if you're going to try to analyze clinical records. Otherwise, you're missing 40% of the chart. So you don't do that. You try to, parse it. But it's definitely not as great as if it was just native text.
It sounds like we're kind of in a transitional period in medical history, bringing in AI, and it sounds like that transition, like with the faxing and scanning of documents, can be a little bit tricky and challenging. So I'd love to hear about what sort of skills are required to navigate a transition into using AI. I guess, Yiding, if you want to keep the floor.
Yeah, I mean, I think, to piggyback a little bit off your last question, Kim, on just kind of some misconceptions. I think through that there's times where I talk to healthcare clients, and I almost think that they've like drank the Kool-Aid too much. I think AI is like magic, and AI is not yet magic. And they're like, why can't you do all this for me? I'm like, we're not that advanced yet. So there's both the kind of I think if you're a consumer, I mean, it's one thing if you're a programmer like Jacob and are using technologies and building technologies. There's others of us who are like lay people who, range from different levels of tech savviness and need to just be able to interact with it. And I fundamentally believe that we as users of AI have to just have a realistic understanding of what to expect, right? We haven't reached Jarvis or the Terminator. We don't have magical beings that are like smarter than us. Like just kind of take that down a little bit. Think of AI like when you Google something, and Google is really smart about recommending the right thing. However, it can also mess up, right? If you accidentally type in the wrong word or decide to go down, it'll misinterpret your text or something. It doesn't have context. Same thing with how you navigate in your car, right? You recognize that there might be something you can see that Google Maps doesn't see. There's a detour, so you're going to override it. So just realize that it's augmenting, providing something, but it's not better or smarter than you all the time. I think we should kind of, as AI users, have that little bit of understanding or kind of expectation. And then I would say, I think where we should have expectations of kind of AI technologies are just saying, being able to help me learn how I can be a little smarter, right? So for a long time, there was this, how do I present models? How do I present determinations that make sense to an end user who can't read math equations? And I think, again, it needs to be, we have to kind of interpret AI a little bit, right? We have to say, even if we're our confidence in this is a 78% for this feature, but 85% for this feature, a human's what does that mean? What they really want to know is that there's a good likelihood that this is, this diagnosis, but there could be some exceptions, and the exceptions that you might want to consider are this, this, this. And that's when you need to put on your human brain and start thinking, should I consider the exceptions? Is that a reasonable thing? And you can take it from there. I think it kind of needs to be Google Maps never tells you that you should 80% chance that you should turn left and 20% chance to turn right. It tells you turn left, and turning right, they think will add 2 minutes. That's it. Then you make the decision and you kind of move on. And we've done a UX, we've done a layer on to help an end user make use of the recommendations of an AI. And that is the kind of the final translational barrier that I think is our responsibility as a technology company to really make AI usable for the lay public.
Expectation setting, being able to translate for lay people. Kyoko, anything you'd like to add to that as far as navigating the transition?
Yeah, no, I think Yading's points are spot on. They're just, in general, expectation setting is a huge one, right? I think there is just a popular temptation, again, to think of AI as magic, and it's not, right? I think that's probably a very human response to this, but it's you somehow think that you're talking to a bot and you're having an entire conversation with it. So then you suddenly think, okay, well, this thing is a thing, it's magical, and it's now going to solve all my problems for me, which is just not how that is, right? And you also shortchange how complex our own neural networks are, right? The ones we're born with, and how many decisions we process at any time. And so, there needs to be broad level setting on that, because I think we tend to think of it as a steps function. And in talking to clinicians and talking to health systems around this, it's pervasive, right? They think, okay, I'm going to take this on and magically everything's going to be automated. But the reality is, any output of AI technology is still raw output. It doesn't have a human inflection on it. It doesn't have human extrapolation on it. And that's one of our most powerful things too, right? We're able to extrapolate stories. We're able to tell stories. We're able to create narratives out of all of the sensory inputs we get right now. That's how we live. And artificial intelligence is artificial. It's simulated on that. So it doesn't have that extra layer of judgment, empathy, narrative that is woven into literally every decision and every thought we have. And I think a lot of people do not realize that. And as lay people, it's it's a pretty nuanced concept, right? And so ultimately, we think of it, again, in our particular use case, for really what we're calling skin cancer screening, right? Being able to screen your skin up front to know if you should go see a dermatologist or not. It really is about suggestion. And just like the Google Maps example, it's a suggestion, but you ultimately have to make that choice, or a clinician makes the choice to biopsy. So it's all about framing, where it's not an either or, but it's augmenting and optimizing a process that was entirely human and prone to the human error prior to this. And that nuance, I think, is a really difficult challenge with a lot of the attention around AI and the possibilities and the opportunities with it. But the responsibility lies on us as practitioners and as service providers to make sure that it's properly messaged and implemented and telegraphed, basically. So that's been one of our challenges from, again, like a product perspective, UX perspective, all of that is critical for this.
And to piggyback off of that too, it sounds like a big challenge is the way that our society understands what AI is and is not. And Kyoko, I think it's a really interesting point about shortchanging ourselves and the skills that human beings have. And Jacob, I'd love to hear you talk a bit about, from the servicer side, that change management structure and how to level set those expectations, and some tips that you've learned.
Yeah, sure. I guess that is expectation management is definitely a super important thing. I guess from Roboflow's perspective, it's been I think it's a little different in terms of we're enabling developers to put something in their application. So for the most part, we're kind of just after that eureka moment where it's like, oh, I didn't know a computer could see excavators as it's flying over a pipeline or something. But it's like, oh yeah, it could do that. So we're kind of more after that sort of eureka moment where you sort of realize oh, all I need to do is upload these images, and then all of a sudden I'll have something that can make inference. And so then the expectation management side, I think, is sort of more on a level deeper after ours, but certainly there is some of that where we're kind of we do some efforts, in the beginning, where it's if a task seems completely intractable, to kind of say that that we probably won't expect great performance here, or think about this probabilistically, or if you can build a human in the loop, or if there's some other ways you can kind of manage but this probabilistic imperfect output that's coming out.
So we have some questions in the Q&A, and I think a couple of them are really around application of AI in healthcare. The first one is, I'm curious if machine learning and AI could be used to assist with mental health treatments, physically or mentally.
I can start with that. I totally think so. There's been a lot of work here. And there's, imagine with mental health, especially, during this pandemic, it's been a major challenge as people's lives are disrupted, as they might have had job interruptions, they can't see people, the support systems have been torn apart. So a lot of attention on this area. There are the way that there's quite a few companies who've been really dedicated to this. And one way has been on being able to monitor for when mental health symptoms are starting based on certain behaviors. And that can be really important, because we all know that mental health for many people is a chronic condition. It waxes and wanes. And sometimes, your depression or your anxiety or your bipolar might be acting up before you even you yourself recognize it, right? Before you realize, oh my, I might be heading into a crisis, your behaviors have already started to change. Like you might be less likely to pick up phone calls, or you might be slower in responding to texts. And so there's been a lot of work to say, how can we kind of almost ambiently like observe these things and say like, wow, you should get a pick-me-up, or like your support network should start reaching out to you because we're noticing that you're acting differently than before. And so I think there's tons of really cool work in a non-creepy way to try to help patients just kind of like notice, and it could even be nudging yourself, right? Because sometimes we know we want to help ourselves, but like somebody needs to tell us like, hey, you seem a little bit more down than usual. And that might even be able to help people get like, oh, maybe that means I should schedule some time with a therapist or go for a run more often. And then there's like the real therapeutic side, which a lot of times has been like chat bots or kind of the nudges that's been used in addiction. And we know by behaviors, like what kind of drives people. And so there's been ways to give people carrots or incentives, especially if they're struggling with addiction. There's ways to kind of just send cute pictures of cats or other things just to lift people. And that doesn't have to be, and it's kind of growing in a way where it's basically AI learning your patterns and learning and kind of pushing you things that might help with mood. And that's also super exciting. So I think both on the kind of diagnostic monitoring and on the therapy side, so much work is already going into this, and a lot of companies are working on it. So if it's an interest of yours, definitely look out there, because there's just really amazing work going on.
I think it's fascinating too, the concept of being able to screen those things early. And as somebody who struggles with anxiety, knowing when those moments are happening earlier on, you can get yourself back down to a more stable state, versus when it's very obvious that there's those small little things of, ooh, that really bothered me. Why did I just react that way? So being able to have AI support that, personally, it sounds amazing. And I think to the point of screening too, and Kyoko, you mentioned this for skincare screening. We have another question about how AI can be properly used to prevent the next pandemic. So I'd love to hear a bit about that from you, Kyoko.
Again, I don't know if I'm qualified to talk about that.
Sure. I don't know if any of us are.
Pretty big topic. I mean, so, I guess just broadly, right? Especially since we are in the middle of a pandemic. And there are a lot of disciplines at work here too. And as we see in the pandemic, the scale is global, and the impact is global too, right? There's so many areas in which you can model for predictions, for outputs, for all of that, right? Because I mean, there are immunologists who are modeling right now how coronavirus is spreading, how it's developing, how it's evolved, all of that stuff. There's also all of the disruption to supply chain and all of that has been figured into our society, right? And then there's also all of the symptoms that people have, the disparate symptoms that people have, the repeat infections. There are so many different angles of this, and it is actually a great application, I believe, of AI, because again, you should leverage technology for its basically limitless processing potential, right? And when it has the overlay of human intent that is very targeted to figure out the answers by crunching all of this data in a way that's flexible and more progressive than it ever has been, then I do believe that there is a tremendous value to AI in at least giving us ways to maybe not prevent the next pandemic, but blunt its force, right? Because we now have access to large data sets because of the impact of this and how it's affected all aspects. And all of those things can be processed in ways using AI to get learnings for next time and to figure out how do you prepare for the next time and what needs to be put in place, what processes, what supply, like all of that. And because of the scale of this technology infrastructure and the type of model work that's being done, I do think, I am hopeful that with specialized participation and specialized work in this space on various aspects of this, hopefully, as a society, we would be better prepared. I think it is overall, it's a great use case for this because there's plenty of data and there are specific ways to look at it.
I love the like Kyoko, I think you're so right, and I love like for flu every year, the Google flu tracker is amazing.
Yes.
And if you're not familiar with it, it's basically Google just tracks like when people search flu symptoms.
Yes.
It is so amazingly accurate.
It is. Yeah, that's a great example.
We as physicians track it because, because what do? Right? We search for our symptoms before we come to the doctor. So we know that the flu tracker predicts where the hot spots are, where it's going to grow. So I think, you can absolutely apply certain things like this. I think one of on the flip side, the very interesting thing about novel diseases and pandemics is that they're novel. And so it's actually a beautiful example where humans are like very, like in the beginning when there's only 20 cases, it's usually a human and there's science. We cannot replace the virologists who are going to DNA sequence them and be like, aha, this is a new novel coronavirus, right? Like that's not machine learning. That's great basic science and like why they win Nobel Prizes. And so it's a wonderful example of like the marriage of kind of where we can use big data, which is like a bunch of random people searching things and we're not, searching for things and worrying. But then also like in the first dozen cases, it's probably, empowering scientists to be able to have the resources and raise the alarm and do the basic science and get to the core science of saying, I found a new disease in this vector and we're going to study it. And then the rest of the AI kind of just follows on. But the initial part is a human leveraging our scientific knowledge to get to that discovery. I think that's super cool, right? Like that's exactly how it should work. And that's how we should empower our public health officials to act fast and go from there.
Still relevant and super fascinating. From a personal note, my dad works for the state of Wisconsin Public Health Department within the communicable diseases working. So he's been busy, but that's one of the things. But tracking what people type in or tweeting about, and I always found that really interesting that that data can be used in ways to help slow the spread. Really. We have another question here. It says, what advice do you give to pharmaceuticals trying to integrate AI and data analytics into squeezing efficiencies in drug development and clinical trials as they move towards more personalized medicine and patient-centric healthcare?
I think I'm not an expert in this area, so I would say like I'm pretty thin. I do think that there is a lot of there's tons of work right now in using ML and neural networks and for things like genomics, because once you start getting DNA, there's just so much data in DNA, and when you start sequencing cancer or others, they're just looking for hits, and so they're looking for p-values that are like p negative to the negative 27th power, because there's just so much data and they're running against so many times a test. But that's been really cool, just to find novel markers in a way that, like, you could not have done millions of tests by a human. It would take forever. So like there's some really cool, just kind of massive surveillance. On the kind of clinical trial side, before, when we ran clinical trials, we would collect the data and then we'd run analysis manually ever so often to look for major dangers. So like adverse events or, crazy findings, for reasons why we might cut a study short. But it was still manual. It required like, okay, every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks, we're gonna cut the data, we're gonna analyze the data, it's gonna be blinded, and it was like a process. And I think, there's been a real effort to say, what if you just had a surveillance system that did that constantly on the fly? And so the moment there was an adverse event that you might not have caught, like, it was like considered a slight side effect, but some people are reporting, you flag that right away instead of waiting the full 4 weeks. Or if you start seeing a trend in certain minorities having a certain, a response that's different from your white males in the study, maybe we should start like alerting that sooner. So maybe there's more work to kind of, again, augment that epidemiologist who's doing that research and doing the analysis. Whereas instead of them sitting down and crunching the numbers themselves, there's something that's doing a surveillance over that. I think that could be really cool. Although my biggest plug is that we have to diversify our clinical trials, because until we bring more data, like, from minorities, from women, from people of all different, walks of life and their biology, our data is always going to be limited by, what our sample size is, which loops back to our beginning of the conversation, but it's like, that is the fundamental challenge that we need in our clinical trials.
Yeah, and the other opportunity and the other initiative underway is decentralization of those clinical trials, right? So being able to, where you don't have to just have them limited to discrete sites, but to be able to, enroll patients at home or various areas, so that you can get higher participation across a broader swath of the population. So there is, I know there's a lot of interest and initiative there. I know that pharmaceutical companies are interested in that as well, ways to take the clinical trials outside of these more expensive site-oriented type setups, where you can actually more flexibly and more continuously track a larger patient population. So decentralization is another big one.
So switching gears here, because I want to make sure we have enough time for Q&A. I'd love to talk a bit about just the AI industry in general. You all have flourishing careers within this field, and for the panelists here, or sorry, for the participants here, I'm sure some of them would be interested in potentially breaking into it, or maybe are just getting their feet wet. So I guess let's start with, what advice do you have for somebody who's interested in this field? And Jacob, since we haven't heard from you in a bit, and you're probably staying away from all that like healthcare, very specific sort of stuff, but Jacob, if you want to start.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a huge tutorial guy. That's one of the ways that we reach people at Roboflow, is just by producing content on doing computer vision and stuff. And so I'm really optimistic for like the ability for just like your curiosity and interest in the resources available on the web to take you to the place that you're trying to go, just to try to find the right content out there and start learning, and kind of, at least if you're interested in programming, just kind of starting to hack away at it and pick a project that you want to get started with and just try it out. So there's a lot of great resources out there. I know a shameless plug on GA too, that you guys have data science and stuff. Yeah, I just kind of get out there. And then from the programming standpoint, I definitely do recommend that project aspect, a small like trackable project that you think you could get done, because that's the best way to take you through things and not just kind of be spiraling around in like a web of different software libraries and stuff. So. And then I guess I will add one more thing on top of that too. With machine learning and AI, there's all kinds of different levels of abstractions that you can kind of go down into it. So you can like go through something just as simple as trying to use one of these web applications to like load in some data and kick off a model training just by like one click, kind of like AutoML training solutions. So that can be one way to sort of like get a start. And then you can kind of go down like through deeper levels of the abstractions, and you can like start to go into just libraries that implement things at a high level, or then you can start to kind of go down and try to learn things at a very like narrow level if you want to like specialize in it. But all of those options are kind of available from my standpoint.
I would also say, just from like a hiring standpoint as well, I think Jacob's point about the project-oriented approach is really important, because I think it's easy to say you're interested in machine learning and data science and AI, but those are very broad concepts, right? I mean, you can just say I like computers, but that doesn't really, that doesn't really get you anywhere. And I think what is critical, again, I think we were talking around this just broadly with our businesses and healthcare and all of that, is the application is really important. And there are very acute acute needs and opportunities to apply AI and ML deliberately. And so the project-oriented approach, I think, is really important, because that helps you demonstrate and it helps you learn how it actually should be used and how it works. And that's critical for us to see when we're hiring into our teams, because we want the people who, decided to, track traffic patterns on their street corner, around specific events, and model around that, and see what insights they can derive. Like, it can be really mundane, it can be really, really specific, but it's a purpose, and it's driven by an interest, and that is important to see, because these things are immensely powerful tools and frameworks, but they're not the it themselves, right? And being able to demonstrate that you really understand and see the value of it in application is tremendously important.
I think everything was said was spot on. We hire, I would just say, like, this is such a hot market. If you're interested in programming or interested in learning programming, every company out in the next 10, 20 years is going to be looking for this talent. You probably don't care about 20 years. You really care about the next 10 years. Like Facebook, Google, Amazon, just those three companies are trying to hire more AI engineers than there are available. And so for all of us, the other companies that are smaller and can't pay Facebook salaries, right? Like, we're competing for AI and ML talent, and we're competing on the mission. We're competing on, you get to work with like amazing people in a smaller team, and but there's just so much hunger for people with real talent and real experience, so absolutely, a lot of people are going to be starting from scratch. So if you feel daunted, like, oh, I haven't done this before, guess what? Huge shortage. So just train up and you'll be considered. We're not looking for people with 20 years of experience, because it just doesn't exist. But if you're going to get experience, definitely be able to show something, because there's just that's how we look at people. And so happy to speak more on this too, because we're hiring a ton of all types of engineers at all times, so we're always looking to reach out if you are interested.
And it's what a great way to like kind of circle back to like GA's mission and purpose of helping people do career changes. And it's the reason that we teach data science is because of that exact sort of situation, where there's a higher demand for people who have that talent versus the talent that's actually there. And so I think with like technical skills, it can feel really daunting to get started and feels like such an unattainable skill set to have. And that's just simply not true. It's a learned skill set, and you have to start somewhere. And so I think just trying stuff out, like Jacob said, and working on projects and just, starting from there and kind of going from there is the right way to go. Final question around so just the industry in general. What do you recommend for people who are just interested in this topic in general, maybe not for a career change, but it's interesting to them? What resources do you recommend for just kind of staying abreast of trends in industry? Kyoko was mentioning machine learning Twitter, which I was unfamiliar about before the panel started. Do you want to go first?
No, that was a joke. That was totally a joke. Not a thing. Well, I think it is a thing, but I mean, because there's any kind of thing on Twitter. But no, that would not be my recommendation for resources. I mean, I think I personally don't have like a huge slew list of resources that I look through beyond like my head data scientist. So if you have one of those, then that would be my resource. There are some really good, blogs out there that follow this type of thing. I would imagine that Jacob would know a little bit more than I would. But yes, I mean, I think there are plentiful resources out there that cover just such a hot topic.
Yeah, subscribe to the Roboflow blog.
There you go.
But yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. I mean, like I'm a big like Hacker News guy, so I'll like watch Hacker News and read articles that are coming up there. Like Reddit or Twitter, you can subscribe to people like who are talking about finding the like kind of the niche area of people you want to follow there. I've got this book here. This is Super Intelligence by Nick Bostrom, which is kind of a cool like general AI book if you want to kind of let your mind run wild with possibilities. But yeah, all kinds of stuff out there.
Yeah, that's a great, I don't have the kind of experience from if I were a programmer, what I would follow. But I think there's just, we're in such a connected world. So basically, however your favorite medium is, there is probably a blog, a podcast, a Reddit channel, a newsletter that you can sign up for. Some people love podcasts, and there are podcasts just probably on AI. And so like maybe that's your favorite way. Basically, it's all out there. There's even, it doesn't feel like in COVID it happens, but like there was actually meetup groups that used to meet, and they would actually be people who were like really enthusiastic, and they would kind of get together. And like, in a previous company, we used meetup groups to meet great engineers because clearly they were excited enough to go to a meetup group with other engineers. Like that's like a real passion. And so we used them to like, we would send our like hiring executives to them and network. I think that they're, something that I would kind of pitch is that if you're a woman hacker or identify as like, he, she, or there is She Geeks Out, which is a kind of a group. They have Slacks and others. They just do events, networking events. They do kind of talks. And then you just connect with other people who are like, hey, I'm looking for women hackers or geeks and anybody to, improve the diversity of our group. So I think, that's an organization I really like. But there's tons out there, and they're often very organic, and it's not overwhelming, right? You kind of pick your medium, and you can find however you want to get involved in AI and healthcare.
I think such a good plug for just the whole concept of networking. And Kyoko, we're joking, but like you get your news from your head data scientist, and I think having people in your circle who are interested in those things, that's how you stay abreast of it. And if you're new to this world, I think even though there's a pandemic going on, I think a lot of those meetup groups are probably still doing some sort of remote things. And so I think building out your community and just connecting with people who are interested in the same thing as you is really powerful. I know our career coaches for our immersive students are like all about networking, again, network to get work. So I think finding those squads wherever you are is definitely a powerful thing. I do want to open up the Q&A. I don't see any additional questions in there, but if anybody who's participating has questions for the panelists, you can type them in the Q&A or in the chat. Otherwise, would love to kind of get some like final thoughts, from the panelists, if there was anything insightful that you took away from today, or anything that you were excited to talk about that we didn't quite get to. Maybe we can start with Yiding.
I thought thank you so much, Kim, and all of General Assembly, and Kyoko and Jacob. This was like such a fun conversation, and we covered a lot of the challenges of both AI as well as healthcare. So super great. I just would say, like, my final plug is for people who are interested in the space is like, don't forget, don't be fearful of taking the first step. It's a really burgeoning industry, right? So it's still relatively new. It means that if you shouldn't feel like you're going to be left behind. You shouldn't feel like, there's so much out there. There is a lot out there, but most of us are new to it. Most of us are just learning. And so you can absolutely find and become an expert pretty quickly in just a year or two. So don't be afraid to take the first step. Like, I'm an entrepreneur, and so I guess I'm really risk-taking and like, hey, just go and do it. But I really believe in that. Like, just go, and if it's exciting and interesting to you and you're passionate about it, just go and do it. This is a really exciting field, both healthcare and AI, and like that merging of that is just going to be huge in the next couple of years.
Kyoko, how about you? Any insights or final thoughts?
No, I would echo Yading. I mean, again, this was just an amazing panel to be part of. It was a super fun conversation. I think parting thoughts on this, I'd say a couple things. I echo Yading's point on healthcare and AI. I think, that's a really potent mixture of mission and technology. And I think at some point, having both of those is especially powerful to drive innovation forward and personal interest in pursuing this space. I also want to make a plug for any women data scientists and engineers out there. As a female founder, and I'm sure Yading can attest to this too. I do really want to support women in the space, and unfortunately the pool is still limited. So there is plenty of opportunity. We are looking for people like that. So I would encourage all the women as well to take a look, because it is, we're looking for you and we want you, and it's not as terrifying as you think it is. And you just have to be smart and focused and interested. And then, lastly, I think the big thing that I've always realized in doing this is that, and I mentioned this before, I think we shortchange ourselves and how complex our own brains are. And I think if you put that in context as you're, pursuing AI and data science, all of that, it's a really interesting way to think about it. Because I'll give you a really quick example. My toddler, or my son, who when he was a toddler a couple years ago, I mean, we were reading a book that was an illustrated, stylistic, cartoony illustrated book about Chicago. He had maybe seen, I've got to think he's seen like 4 yellow cabs in his life to that point. In this illustrated, stylistic book, it was a cartoony picture of the bean with a taxi reflected in it, a yellow taxi reflected in it. So it was distorted, it was a cartoon thing, and he pointed to that and said, taxi. And so, again, it's like crazy that a human brain can do that. He's 3 years old. He's literally seen like 4 taxis in his entire life, but somehow he's able to look at a stylistic reflection in a bean that's all pixelated of a taxi and know it's a taxi. That is actually mind-blowing from like an AI perspective, right? Because like, we're talking about curating the perfect data sets and ground truths, and here's a 3-year-old who's like, okay, here's this pixelated reflection in the bean of a taxi, and I know it's a taxi. So I just want to leave you with that, because it's like, our brains are pretty freaking incredible, and AI is getting really close to a lot of that, but we're pretty amazing. So our own neural networks are pretty crazy things themselves. So that puts some of this all in perspective.
That's awesome. I wholeheartedly agree. Like, every morning when I wake up, it's like you like just see all this like consciousness flooding in, and you're like, wow, how does that happen? So I definitely want to echo what Yading and Kyoko were saying about, thanks for putting this on. Thanks to GA for having us all. I think these kind of discussions are like super important things to have for the community, and I really love doing them, and it's awesome for us all to get together and discuss things. And then, yeah, I'll continue to echo that just kind of general excitement for the progression of things, you know, like, I mean, where we're going to be in 20, 30, 40 years in the field of AI is going to be vastly different than it is now. So even if it seems like there's a little bit of traction to getting like, or a little bit of inertia to get started, or you feel like there's some blockades, you know, and it's maybe 6 months or a year of picking up some new skills or technologies or something, you know, that's peanuts compared to the long-term horizon of things. So yeah, thanks again for having us, and this has been really awesome. So
Again, thank you all so much for joining and for sharing your thoughts and insights. And as somebody who is not in AI or in healthcare, I think I learned a lot today, and is an interesting perspective to have, especially given living through a pandemic right now. And I think for anybody here who is interested in potentially like looking into a career like this, you're in a good space with GA. Our community is a lot of people who are looking at similar sort of things. So stick with us. We're going to be sending a follow-up email. It's going to have a recording of this and other links to other General Assembly events. And with that, I hope everyone has a great rest of their Thursday evening. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
thanks everyone.